It's the Veterans Radio Hour. Proudly supported by McDonald's and their national salute to the U.S. military. Now, stay tuned for the Veterans Radio Hour next on the TRN Talk Radio Network.
Tango Charlie Bravo, you're a go for the Veterans Hour.
Hi, she'll have a Happy Meal and I'll have the Big Mac.
Dad, when will I be old enough for a Big Mac?
When you're in college.
College.
Now, when you register specially marked McDonald's gift certificates at upromise.com, a portion of the value goes into a uPromise account for a child's education. So, the more specially marked gift certificates you buy, the more you'll save for college.
I want to be a doctor.
Hello, gift certificates.
Sign up for free and get the details at upromise.com.
We love to see you smile.
Welcome, one and all, to the Veterans Radio Hour. It's our tribute to all of those who served our great nation's armed forces, past and present, and their tremendous accounts of heroic duty and bravery. With your host, Brigadier General Dave Grange. And now, coming to you live from our Veterans Center studio, here is General Dave.
This month marks the first anniversary of the beginning of combat operations in Afghanistan. The demands on America's armed forces are tremendous, with ongoing missions in over 100 countries today. Over 70,000 guardsmen and reservists are still mobilized for the war against terrorists and countries that support them. 20,000 active duty members are on what's called stop loss. It's a status where that service member is not allowed to terminate their normal duty obligation because of their critical specialty or maybe because of the size of our military. How do we maintain the requirements placed on our armed forces today and into the next several decades? Is it a duty of every American citizen to serve their country somehow? In the military or another public service role? Napoleon said his army was so powerful because it was the first based on the principle of the citizen soldier, that everybody had a responsibility to defend the state. Tonight, we're going to discuss the draft. Do we need one or not? Or is there another option, some type of national service obligation like the one Senator McCain proposed? In the studio with us tonight, we have Dr. Charlie Moskos, Professor of Sociology at Northwestern University, Major General David Harris, the Adjutant General of the State of Illinois, Mr. Roy Dolgus, the Chairman of the Veterans Advisory Council in Chicago. And online from Washington, D.C., we have Dr. Alan Gropman, Professor of Grand Strategy and Mobilization at the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. But first now, I'd like you to listen to Kenny, our senior producer.
And if you have a question or a comment for the Veterans Radio Hour, you can email us at veteransradiohour.com or call our hotline directly here to the phone, 866-928-2329. Back to General Dave.
The show tonight is dedicated to Sergeant Alvin York, a native of Tennessee. He was drafted in 1917. Trained at Fort Gordon, served with the 328th Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Division. That's the 82nd Division, not 82nd Airborne Division in those days. He made corporal and then sergeant after his most notable accomplishment on October 8th, 1918 in the Argonne Forest in northern France. He killed at least 20 enemy soldiers with his rifle and then pistol, saving his platoon, and then captured many more Germans, earning the Medal of Honor. The French Allied commander called Sergeant York's heroism the greatest accomplished by any soldier of all the armies of Europe. Sergeant York was an American draftee. Tonight,
The Veterans Radio Hour proudly brings you This Week in Military History. And now, General Dave.
back in October 1940, the draft went into effect when Secretary of War Henry Stimson drew number 158 from the lottery bowl. October 12th, yesterday, but 2 years ago, was a terrorist attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. And sadly today, Stephen Ambrose, the famous author, died, author of D-Day, Lewis and Clark, Band of Brothers, and many others, who captured parts of America's history and highlighted its heroes to us.
He'll truly be missed.
That he will. Back to our guest tonight on the subject, a draft or some sort of national service. Do we need it or do we not? We have Dr. Charlie Moskos, professor of sociology at Northwestern University, where he holds the Anderson Chair in the College of Arts and Sciences. He's a graduate of Princeton University, drafted immediately after graduation. Later, he attended the University of California, receiving his PhD. He's the author of many books, to name a few: The American Enlisted Man, The Military, More Than Just a Job, All That Can Be Done, about black leadership and racial integration, The Army Way, The Postmodern Military, Armed Forces After the Cold War, and other books and articles. The Wall Street Journal calls Dr. Moskos the nation's most influential military sociologist. Dr. Moskos traveled to visit combat units in Vietnam, Panama, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia, and Kosovo. He was appointed by George Bush to the President's Commission on Women in the Military in 1992. He is infamous for coining the phrase, don't ask, don't tell, a policy on homosexuals in the military cited by President Clinton in 1994. He has been awarded the Army's highest decoration for a civilian, the Distinguished Service Award. To his right flank is Major General David Harris. He's the 35th Adjutant General of the state of Illinois, the senior officer in the chain of command for both the Illinois Army and Air National Guard. It includes 13,500 men and women in uniform. He's a graduate of Georgetown University, has served 30 years in the Guard. He's an infantry officer. He's inducted into the Infantry OCS, that's Officer Candidate School, Hall of Fame, this year. Has served 10 years as a member of the Illinois House of Representatives and the Illinois Guard soldiers, responsible for the Illinois Guard soldiers' largest call-up since the Korean War. And by the way, the state of Illinois had the most soldiers deployed at one time from the National Guard during the war on terrorism. To his right flank is Roy Dolgus, another draftee, with us tonight besides Dr. Moskos. All-state basketball player from New Jersey, received a scholarship to Loyola University in Chicago, but then, and he can explain this to you, drafted in 1966. He became a military policeman, went to Vietnam with the 9th Infantry Division and the 196th Infantry Brigade, discharged in 1968, received his degree in business administration after he departed the military. He's on a selective service board and chairman of the the Veterans Advisory Council of Chicago. He's also the president of the Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 242. And online with us from Washington, D.C. is Dr. Alan Gropman, a professor of Grand Strategy and Mobilization at the Industrial College of the Armed Forces located at Fort McNair, Washington, D.C. He's also the adjunct professor of Security Studies at Georgetown University. He served the United States Air Force for 27 years, retiring as a colonel. He has 4,000 flying hours, 670 missions in Vietnam. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. He's a distinguished graduate of the Air War College. He has his doctor's degree in history at Tufts University. He's the author of many books, to name a few: The Big L, American Logistics of World War II, Mobilize in U.S. Industry in World War II, Air Power and Airlift Evacuation of Com Duc, and the Air Force Integrates, as well as many other publications. So I'd like to go right into the subject tonight and ask Dr. Gropman, do we need a draft or do we not, sir?
No, General Grange, I don't think you do. Not in the present situation, anyway. It's conceivable if you got into another major conflagration like World War II, that would have to be revisited. But we made our numbers last fiscal year, very comfortably, and I'm confident we'll make our numbers this fiscal year confidently. All you have to do is pay it. When you pay it, the people will sign up. There are a lot of good reasons why we don't want to turn to a draft. Quality of the military today is better than it's ever been. We've never had a better military. We've never had a military with more aptitude. We've never had a military that's come in more disciplined. And there are a number of good reasons why a draft is not the route to take. I know that probably everybody else in your panel will disagree with that. I know that Charlie does. Charlie and I have talked about this and debated this issue, Charlie Moskos, many times.
Well, let me go to Charlie for a second. We'll get right back to you. Dr. Charlie Moskos, of course, he's a good friend of yours, but has a 180-degree view.
Right.
Dr. Moskos?
Well, as much as I respect Al's and Gropman's views on security matters, here's where we do depart. Currently, our armed forces are under strength and overstretched. Nobody can deny that. We have a war on terrorism, perhaps a military, conflict with Iraq yet to be determined. But just let's focus on the war on terrorism, which is a reality. I advocate a three-tiered draft. We need a draft for the armed forces. By the way, when you have a draft, you're going to get many more volunteers. And you don't have to pay them as much. Al Gropman says you got to pay. Well, don't forget the draftee was never paid that much because most draftees were citizen soldiers and went on to their civilian careers. Then you also need, however, a draft for Homeland Security, airport security, natural disaster control, customs, immigration, border patrol. All of these positions are under strength and are costing an arm and a leg to staff. And then there should be a third option for those who find military service against their principles. And interestingly enough, Sergeant York himself came out of a pacifist tradition.
That's right.
And I would think there could be alternative forms of service, working in hospitals, teaching for America, Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, environmental work, and the rest. So with those three kinds of tiers, you would certainly find a draft very I think, acceptable.
Well, let's go. We'll come back to that, Charlie, because I want to just go around the table and then expand on some of these points because there's depth to each of them, if that's okay. And I'd like to go to General Harris, since he was in Illinois Congress. Is a draft now, if one's proposed, politically acceptable?
I don't think a draft is politically acceptable. I would draw a distinction between national service and a draft. I think Dr. Gropman hit the nail on the head in terms of the quality of our armed forces today has never been better. Those young men and women that we are bringing into the service are some of the most motivated that you will ever find, and we have tremendously capable forces because of that. I think you lose some of that motivation if you go to a draft. At the same time, I'd agree with my friend here to my left, Dr. Moskos, in that some form of national service, perhaps for some other sorts of missions, might be advisable. There is no doubt in my mind that the military is being overstretched. The commitments are going up. The numbers by way of end strength are holding steady, and at some point something has to give. What's happening, of course, is we're calling on the National Guard and the Reserve more and more and more, and I think perhaps that's not the tack we want to continue to take.
Well, saying that, let me go to Roy Dolgus here for a moment, just to get his point of view on a draft or national service or neither.
I think we need eventually we'll need a draft in the service. I think the country is, or the service is missing something when they're not drafting men into the service. You have a blend. I think you have the men who are really dedicated to the service, and you've got these other gentlemen coming in who didn't really want to go in, but they're going to add something to the service that it doesn't have now. And I don't know exactly what that might be, but I think it will help the service. And also, I think we need some kind of a draft to educate these people into loyalty of this country.
Okay, now before we go back to our guest, I'd like to go to the telephone. We have a call in from Mr. Ralph Zumbro. Ralph, are you with us?
Yes.
Please, do you have a question for the panel here?
Well, a question.
Or a comment.
A question and a comment. I first went into the military in 1957, volunteer, and I served with both regular Army and U.S., in other words, draftees. And after basic training, you could not tell the difference between the two unless you looked at the serial number. the draftee makes a perfectly adequate soldier. And I think we're missing a very large bet by not bringing in all levels of society. I served 6 years in the old system when every male child had a 6-year military obligation. I served that out. I was out for 4 years, and I went back in specifically for Vietnam. When I did go back in, I wound up in charge of a complete Chicago street gang, which had been caught by the police running a very sophisticated chop shop. And when I got handed a stack of forms a foot thick, I knew something had happened. And the clerk said, "You see those 40 guys over against the wall sitting on the floor with the attitude?" I said, "Yes." He said, "That's a complete Chicago street gang. They're all yours. Get them down to Fort Hood." Well, I inserted myself into that gang's chain of command by locating the leader, telling him that you are now in the United States Army, the biggest gang in the world, and I know how it works. I want 4 squad leaders. We're getting on an airplane in an hour. 8 weeks later, Sergeant Klingerman and I turned out one fine light infantry platoon. And the point of this is light infantry does not require a college degree in rocket science. There is room for everybody in national service. And there are a lot of children rattling around on the streets today who would be well served by being given 2 or 3 years of a structured existence.
Okay, let me take it from there, right from that one. Charlie, response?
Well, the response, first of all, we're in the same draft era. I might add, too, that, one of our fellow draftees was Elvis Presley. Can you imagine Eminem, being in the Army today? I hope he would join the Illinois National Guard. But on the issue of the quality, the point was very valid made. As a matter of fact, I go further. Actually, the dropout rate for a U.S. or draftee in the late 50s was 10%. The dropout for a regular Army volunteer was 20%. The dropout rate today in the military for all 4 services is about 35%. That is 35% of those entering the service don't even complete their term, and every one of those is a pain in the organization.
Was that because of the standards and training, or is it because of
the quality
the
has
type
changed
of person?
The quality has changed, and here Al Gropman and I will certainly disagree. But let me tell you, in the late 50s, among Army accessions, about approximately 10% had college diplomas. Today, with a much higher educated population than you had 40 or 50 years ago, it's around 1% have a college diploma. So you can't tell me what we have. Well, you need privileged youth to serve if a country feels that it's going to take casualties. And the reason that the draft lost legitimacy in the Vietnam era was because privileged youth avoided military service, and that's why the draft didn't have the legitimacy that it had during the Cold War.
Now that
and
point,
World War II.
And that point about the elite, I'd like to get Al to comment on that. Al, because that is a significant point that Charlie always brings up about the privileged youth. Do you have a comeback to Charlie on that?
And everybody's talking pro-draft. Is that what you want?
No, I'm not saying. I just want your opinion on what Charlie said about who should. If you have everybody committed, in other words, the privileged youth as well as those that seem to be volunteering, is that a significant point or not?
Well, General Grange, 2 people are talking to me. Somebody just said they're going to put me on hold, and I was responding to him.
I'm sorry.
And I guess to keep
No,
it
you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, I never did hear what Mr. Zimbro said, so if anybody else calls in, you're going to have to plug him into what... he must have said something funny because all of you guys were laughing at him. Or laughing with him.
With
him. We fought the Gulf War with an all-volunteer force, and we did very well. The draft had ended 18 years before the war. I did pick up 2 or 3 clauses or 2 or 3 phrases of what Mr. Zimbro said, and his key argument is that the draft is good for you, like it was some kind of a vitamin pill. And you usually find out that that's usually the main argument. The draft has never been Charlie just alluded to the fact that the draft was not equitable during the Vietnam War. It certainly wasn't, and it really wasn't equitable in the Cold War period. They took a bigger swipe because a lot of people evaded the draft, and a lot more would have evaded the draft if there was any combat involved. No draft from the Civil War draft on was equitable, and especially in the way that it was actually applied. Since we haven't had an equitable draft since 1862 in the case of the Confederacy and 1863 in the case of the Union, I'm willing to wager that politically you can't make one that's equitable. Charlie raised the point about money. We pay a guy down in Texas $25 million a year, guaranteed for 10 years to play shortstop, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, for 5 months of the year. If you can pay him $25 million a year for 10 years, we can pay our draftees more, or we can pay our enlistees more if we want to. It depends upon what you value. It depends upon what you value. We can pay somebody $20 or $30 or $40,000 a year to go to Afghanistan. The reason that the numbers are tight is the Congress has put an active duty force and a reserve component force at about 2.8 million, 1.4 each. If they asked for more and they were willing to pay it, you would get more people. You would get more people in.
Okay, let me give Charlie just about 30 seconds to respond to that before we go to break.
Yes, I think Al and I just read the facts differently about how equitable the draft was. In my Princeton class of 750 men, approximately 450 served in the late 1950s. When you look at my singles high school, Albuquerque High School, the number was approximately half of that when you had a cross-section of all classes. But more importantly, on the money issue, during the draft era, a senior NCO made 7 times the income of a private. Today, that same senior sergeant makes only 2.5 times that of a private. We have overpaid recruits and underpaid career soldiers.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back here shortly. Go ahead, Kenny.
You're listening to the Veterans Radio Hour, and as we keep growing, you can email us at veteransradiohour.com or call our toll-free number at 800-591-0020 to leave us a message and tell us what your ideas are. Last week, we had 37 countries log on during our new program. We now have a chat room, so if you are listening online, click on the chat room part, and GIM Productions in Naperville will get all plugged in with you and give us the questions. This Veterans Radio Hour is made possible through generous support of individual founders and members, including our newest corporate sponsor, Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer, and of course audience participation, help from John Murnane and Carol Murphy. Next week's show is going to be all on veterans' health benefits. We've been able to bring on Congressman Ronnie Shows of Mississippi, who sits on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. You can write to radio stations near you. Tell them to carry this program. We'll give it to them for nothing. They'll have the opportunity to be able to carry this program live as well as on rebroadcasts. Just a letter to the station near you. And now, we are also at times donating money from our sponsors and this radio station to different veterans organizations. Become a part of the Veterans Radio Hour.
At ease, soldier. The Veterans Hour with General Dave will settle in again after a short break on the Talk Radio Network. The Veterans Hour now returns to full readiness on the TRN Talk Radio Network.
Okay, before I go on to the next part of the program, I'd like to recognize 2 invitees to the Veterans Radio Center here tonight. These are 2 individuals that served their country in other ways than being in the service. They were translators in Bosnia. In fact, they work with me in Bosnia. And with us tonight is Mitch March and Dan Kisic, and we thank them for their duty to their country and being with us tonight in the radio studio. Tonight, our Valor salute is to a First Lieutenant David Weber. Lieutenant Weber was in the 3rd Reconnaissance Troop of the 3rd Infantry Division, Rock of the Marne, during World War II. On 17 July 1943, during combat operations in Sicily, He led a 3-vehicle patrol into the enemy-held territory to locate an isolated Ranger unit. They encountered 4 enemy tanks, and he was in soft-wheeled vehicles at the time. He was outnumbered, outgunned, but Lieutenant Weber dispersed his vehicles and ordered his men to open fire to stop the enemy with 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns. Out of ammunition after a long fight, with 3 men hit, including himself, seriously wounded, he seized a Thompson machine gun and engaged an enemy tank at 30 yards in the open, killing the crew members, causing it to run into a bridge and then later into a ditch, blocking the road. They continued to engage the other 3 tanks throughout the night with small arms fire until reinforcements arrived the next morning. We salute our hero, our valor story, First Lieutenant David Weber from the Rock of the Marne, 3rd Infantry Division.
Hooah. The Veterans Radio Hour now will salute the Active Service Person of the Week, made possible through the support of Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer. As they say, PBR me, ASAP. The great taste available at your local retail market, Dave.
Okay, we're going to salute our active service member, which actually is in a U.S. Air Force National Guard, activated for duty in Saudi Arabia for a 3-month tour, and that's Senior Airman Taya Shram. She is a services technician specializing in food service at the Prince Sultan Air Base during her tour of duty. She's married to Captain Jeff Shram of the Army National Guard. They both live in Grand Prairies, Texas. Thank you very much for your duty. We appreciate it. We salute you. Hooah. Now we're going to go back to our guests, and I'd like to go back to Roy Dogus. He was a guy that was drafted, and I'd like to ask him why, how it happened, and what he thought about it. Roy?
As you know, I was in college, and I maintained straight A's in basketball, but I didn't maintain straight A's in my academics, so I was let go. And a short period after that, I was drafted into the service, and I looked upon that as the greatest experience of my life. Being in the service, it made me more of a more mature person. I came out, I went back to school, graduated, and it made me a better person, I think.
So the service gave you the fortitude to pass and get your degree. And we appreciate your service, and Roy, there's many American citizens with that same situation that were drafted. And you know, I got mixed emotions, and I'll sum it up at the end about draft, no draft, national service. But I can tell you, I want to go back to a comment that I believe Ralph Zumbro made earlier in a call-in, and that is that there's a few differences, but you know, after 30 years of having in my command serving with draftees and volunteers, once those soldiers are trained, integrated into a unit, I couldn't tell the difference either, to be honest with you. All good soldiers, great citizens of the United States of America. At this time, I'd like to go back to General Dave Harris and ask him about if you, not just today, everything we've talked about so far is kind of today. If we have to sustain this fight against terrorists around the world, if we go to war for Iraq and possibly some other regional conflicts, can we sustain the mobilization effort of the Guard and the reserves, the active service forces that at the current strength that we have today, a decade, 2 decades from now? David?
I think we can if those guardsmen and reservists are used in their traditional roles, which, as an example for the National Guard, tends to be combat and combat support. If you start using those forces for less demanding tasks, and again I come back and draw the difference between a draft and national service, if you start using them for less demanding tasks such as guarding gates and checking IDs, otherwise known as force protection and installation security, and you have those soldiers who are not full-time soldiers but rather are now mobilized for 6, 8 months or a year, doing tasks which they are not trained for under their military occupational specialty, you're not going to get the folks to sign up again, to extend their tours of duty. So we have some real concerns in that regard. But if you're saying, hey, we need these folks for the combat support, for the combat and combat support that they're trained to do, they're going to be there and they're going to be willing to do whatever mission they're given.
Well, but what about multiple call-ups? What about their employers? these people 270 days, 180 days, repetitively.
And I have had soldiers called up for an extended period of time prior to 9/11 of 2001 and post 9/11 of 2001, and I can tell you that the employers have been noticeably different post 9/11 of 2001. 1,300 Illinois Army National Guardsmen just returned from U.S. Army Europe. They were there for 8 months, and I did not hear a single complaint from any employer for that mobilization. About 2 years ago, we had some soldiers in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait for a fairly lengthy period of time. We had some real problems, problems the wrong word. We had some concerns with employers at that time. There has been a noticeable shift in the attitude of employers right now.
Yeah.
And of course, at the same time, the labor market is a little bit different.
Yeah,
in the
but
past
you know,
year and a
I
half.
think you're right, though. I notice the corporations, the business leadership is taking care of a lot of these Guard and Reserve call-ups better than it was happened in the past. I know the Tribune Company has a very good policy. I went over it the other day, and I was impressed with the detail on how they take care of the military service member. I'd like to go back to Charlie Moskos about ask him that same question about sustaining this demand on our military 10, 20 years into the future.
It cannot be sustained without some dramatic change in the personnel system. I advocate a draft. There are other ways you can think of it too, such as short enlistments geared to student benefits, and don't give anybody federal college age unless he or she does a term of service. That would be, I think, a minimal thing. But as the general was saying, that for these jobs like guard duty, I mean, that's perfect for a draftee or a short-term enlistee. And don't forget, too, you know, with all the high tech that's going on in the world, there are a lot of Beetle Bailey jobs in the military. Anybody who's been in a military unit knows there are many jobs that require what we used to call OJT, on-the-job training, and that what a bright, dedicated person can learn in a matter of days, or at least a few weeks. So I think we're hiding from the big problem. We're not recognizing the elephant in the living room by saying that the present force structure is adequate. Obviously, it's not.
Let me ask you one follow-on question, and I want to go to Dr. Gropman for a response. 2 quick answers, please, gentlemen. One is that we just talked about the sustainment here. Now, I've always been taught, I've always read, both there, because I went to the National War College right next door to where ICAP is with Dr. Gropman, but I was always taught that an army doesn't go to war, a nation goes to war.
No.
Without a draft, does the nation go to war?
No, a nation doesn't go to war without citizen soldiers doing the fighting. The fact of the matter is, since Vietnam, we have lost totally, less than 1,000 people in the last 45 years in terms of combat operations. We have not had a war of that kind of magnitude for almost close to a half a century. So this is where you do need the citizen soldier.
Okay. Dr. Gropman, a response quick, please.
Yeah, you mean the country didn't go to war in the Persian Gulf in 1991?
How many did we lose, Al?
Well, I know we didn't lose the 300, but what difference does it make? You mean the country didn't go to war?
The country has not suffered long-term casualties.
Well, I understand that, but the country went to war. Look, when you start talking about numbers, the British, with a much smaller population, were able to get 500,000 volunteers to go fight in Flanders Field and elsewhere in Europe because the people in Britain, men in Britain, thought that it was worthwhile. The other thing, the country was worthwhile and worth fighting for. We also have another ace up our sleeve this time. We're approaching 20% of the service in women now, taking over many of the functions since they don't, by law, can't do ground combat, taking over almost all of the combat support and combat service support roles, and many roles that are in the Air Force and other services that are like combat. If you pay the people adequately, then the people will come in.
All right,
we have a huge population. Yeah. Population of 285 million.
Very quickie. In World War I in Flanders Field, the nobility suffered higher casualty rates than the working class did.
Sure.
Okay, let me break it from there just for a minute. Let me go to another guest we have on that we all respect very much, Mr. Al Lynch, Medal of Honor winner, recipient, with the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam. He's now the policy advisor for the Illinois Attorney General. And I would like to ask Mr. Al Lynch his feeling on a draft. Sir?
Well, I'm for a universal draft. I think that anybody that graduates from high school 30 days upon graduation, should spend the next 2 years in boots. Men, women, and even disabled. You see disabled people skiing down hills and playing tennis and doing all kinds of things. I think that gives us a vested interest in this country. We all have to serve. Rich, poor, black, white, Latino, doesn't matter. It gives us the right of citizenship.
Well, we're going to come back to you, Al, because I want to talk to you more about this, especially the point about should women be drafted if there's a draft. It came in on email just a minute ago from one of our listeners, and we'll get back to that in a moment.
And now let's recognize the McDonald's Veteran Employee of the Week.
Rick Cole is the McDonald's owner-operator of 4 restaurants located in Hayes, Russell, and Waukene, Kansas. Rick served in the Air Force for 8 years from 1970 to 78. Rick's most memorable experiences while serving was about his time as an instructor pilot for the T-37, which was at Williams Air Force Base in Chandler, Arizona. Rick was privileged to be honored by 2 different classes of students as their outstanding instructor pilot. Rick is also proud to have helped develop people. Rick said no matter what you are doing, you can make a positive impact on someone's life. He said he had the opportunity to develop a number of pilots, some of whom are still in the service today as senior officers. As a McDonald's owner and operator, he says that he has even more opportunities to develop our employees over the last 22 years to help them grow and become self-sufficient. I am just proud of those, he says, who we have helped earn the position of restaurant manager, as I am of those who have gone on to become school teachers, bankers, and owners of their own businesses. When asked how his experience in the Air Force helped him as a McDonald's owner-operator, he answered, as an officer, especially as a pilot, you get involved in leadership and making decisions in quick time, all based on formal training. You certainly do that at McDonald's restaurants, just like in a cockpit. That's how the system is supposed to work under normal conditions and how it works when things become a little hectic. One nice thing with my work at McDonald's is that the stakes are different. No one will lose their life if we make a mistake. In addition to his service in the Air Force, Rick is proud to be recognized by McDonald's and his peers for his innovation as an owner and operator. He and his team created MixState.com, an employment, image, and recruiting tool using the internet to relate to today's workforce.
Hi, she'll have a Happy Meal, and I'll have the Big Mac.
Dad, when will I be old enough for a Big Mac?
When you're in college.
College.
Now, when you register specially marked McDonald's gift certificates at upromise.com, a portion of the value goes into a uPromise account for a child's education. So, the more specially marked gift certificates you buy, the more you'll save for college.
I want to be a doctor.
Hello, gift certificates.
Sign up for free and get the details at upromise.com.
We love to see you smile.
You're listening to the Veterans Hour on the Talk Radio Network. The Veterans Hour now returns to duty on the Talk Radio Network.
Okay, welcome back, and I want to pick up on that last comment that Al Lynch, the Medal of Honor winner, had made, and with him also we have on the phone from D.C. Dr. Alan Gropman, professor. We have Roy Dogus, the chairman of Veterans Advisory Council here in Chicago, General Harris, the adjutant general of Illinois, and Charlie Moskos, professor of sociology at Northwestern University. And also, going back to Al Lynch, the Medal of Honor winner, you made a comment, if there is a draft, to include women. Why?
Equals equal. Not some are more equal than others. You know, women are considered equal by law, except for the draft. No, everybody goes.
So you're saying if we have a draft, it's everybody?
Everybody, no deferments, equal across the board, rich, poor.
College, it doesn't matter?
No, you don't go college first. You go to the military first for 2 years. If you serve in the military, if you have to go to a battalion or something that works in the VA hospital or whatever, that's fine, but you do go to the military. Everybody has a vested interest in this country.
Okay. General Harris?
Al's absolutely right. Everybody does have a vested interest, and I will tell you that my experience was that when there is some sort of universal service, everybody has a shared experience, which I think is important. Politically, though, look at you really have 2 hurdles you've got to get by. One, you've got to get Congress to reinstitute the draft if you're going to go that direction, and then 2, you've got to get Congress to say, okay, we're going to make it apply to women as well as men, because the National Selective Service Act right now only applies to men, as we know. So those are 2 very big hurdles. Again, I come back and say, for filling the ranks of our military, if you look what's out there now, you have to do women, all right? I don't think that's politically palatable, and I don't think Congress is going to go in that direction. That's why I look at a form of national service other than the military, some sort of as the less military kinds of jobs that Charlie was talking about earlier in the program.
Okay, and I'm going to go right now to Dr. Moskos and then to Dr. Gropman. Very quickly, we're going to go back to you again, but real quickly, women in the military.
Not to be drafted. Women should be drafted for another national service occupation. Of course, they can volunteer. But if you did have a draft, a la Israel, where women are drafted, though a much smaller percentage serve in Israel than the male rate, they don't have to be drafted, obviously, into the combat arms. I think that would be insane to draft women into the ground combat arms.
Okay, and I'd like to ask Dr. Gropman the same question. If there is a draft or some type of national service, your opinion on women?
Of course. If you have universal, we never had universal military training, but if you did have it, of course women should be drafted, and then you would decide what roles the women would play based upon their physical and mental aptitude. And that's why, there was, for the longest time, World War II, we limited women to 2% of the force. Never got that number because they were not allowed to do the more interesting things or achieve rank. Today, the number is, the percentage is 9 times greater because we've opened up practically all the military specialties to women.
Okay.
I agree with Mr. Lynch. Yes, women, if you're going to draft everybody.
Okay, well, this was a great question, and I'll tell you, it just came over the email from John Eli from Missouri that asked that question, and it's a very good question. We appreciate it. Now, I'd like to mention something to everybody here, and as well as the audience, and then I'd like to go back for one wrap-up comment from each of our distinguished guests. First of all, I don't know if many people know that there's an American creed. There is, in fact, an American creed. And it was a result of a nationwide contest held in 1917. There were 3,000 entries. The winner was a Mr. William Page. He was a descendant of John Page, who had come to America in 1650 and settled in Williamsburg, Virginia. William Page served in Washington as a capital page and later elected clerk of the House. The Commissioner of Education from the state of New York came up with the idea to have an American creed. So he and the Speaker of the House of Representatives awarded William Page as the winner, and the creed was put in the Congressional Record on April 13, 1918. This was during World War I, at a time requiring patriotism, maybe somewhat like today. The creed goes like this: I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy in a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and defend it against all enemies. I just wanted to share that with you because, to be honest with you, until a few months ago, I did not know there was an American creed, and I love it. Anyway, I'd like to go around now, and please be brief. I'd like to get a final comment on your point of view on a draft or national service or no draft. Dr. Gropman, sir.
I don't believe that we need a draft, and I don't believe I would believe in national service if I trusted every government now and into the future, but I don't know the governments into the future. Therefore, I don't want the government to have that kind of control.
Okay, Medal of Honor, Al Lynch.
I believe we need a draft. We need it now, and it needs to be universal.
Okay, General Harris.
Some sort of national service is needed. I do not believe we need a draft to meet our commitments at the present time, and don't need to draft people into the military.
And Charlie Moskos, your point, and if it has to be with national service, give us a quick little tease on how.
The draft should be part of a larger program of national service, including military service, homeland security, and other forms of alternative civilian service. And if we have a draft and we don't need everybody in the youth, we must start drafting at the top of the social ladder. Some people have more of a vested interest in this country. We're not all equal, and who better to serve than those who have the most vested interest?
What do you get if you serve? Should you get something if you serve this nation year by year or whatever?
GI Bill, for example. That's the obvious one. And veterans' preferences on employment.
Okay, so what about a year of college for a year of service?
Well, that would be the GI Bill type argument.
As
yes.
a part of the GI Bill. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody with us tonight. Charlie Moskos, Professor of Sociology at Northwestern, Major General David Harris, the Adjutant General of Illinois, Roy Dolgus, the Chairman of Veterans Advisory Council Chicago, Al Lynch, Medal of Honor winner, Policy Advisor for Illinois Attorney General, and calling in Dr. Alan Gropman from the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. Thank you very much. It was a great input from all of you, and we really appreciate it.
Good
Duty
show,
first,
Dave.
Hua.
Well, thank you, General Dave.